My belief is that an area's history can be told in the history of the individuals who live in an area. With that in mind, and on behalf of the Kern Antelope Historical Society, we have been interviewing local citizens to tell their and their families' history with regards to their activities in the area. Today, we are going to hear from William Bill Deaver via an electronic interaction on Zoom. This is our first attempt at an electronic interview, which has presented some challenges. But here goes. Good afternoon, Bill. It is October the 15th, 2021. And we are here to learn a little bit about your family's history and your history. So let me start out asking you, what brought your family to the Mojave area?
Okay, my brother, sister, mother, and I were all born in Bakersfield. My dad was born in North Whittier Heights, and his family lived in the San Joaquin Valley for years. He was in Orange Cove. They helped set up the orange business down there. So we moved to Madera in 1940, and we moved to Riverdale, a little town near Fresno, in about 1944, 45, and to Arvin in 1947. And we only stayed a year in Arvin because if you've ever been to Arvin, I don't think I have to explain any further. Anyway, my dad was working for Shell Oil Company, distributing and selling Shell products. And a man he'd worked for back before I was born in 1935, had 2 Shell service stations and a Shell bulk plant in Mojave. And he needed somebody to run them. He lived in Palmdale. So we came up to Mojave the day the YD-49 Flying Wing crashed at Edwards. And Edwards Air Force Base is named after the co-pilot, Glenn Edwards, a captain. So we got about to Keene, and my dad took a deep breath and says, "I'm not going back," because he could breathe. He was having breathing troubles in Arvin. And we've been here ever since. We lived in Madera all through the war years, and my dad was not in the military. He was in the oil business, so he was exempt. But my mom and dad were very active in the war with the selling war bonds and taking care of the troops when they had what do they call the
canteens?
Well, yeah. Anyway, so we learned then and there, Mike and I did, we learned then and there about community service. And my parents, wherever we went, people say you should bloom where you're planted, and they did that. And they were active in community. And of course, it didn't hurt his business anyway doing that. And I got my start in the newspaper business in Riverdale, writing a kids column for the Riverdale Free Press, which no longer exists, like many other newspapers. It was a weekly paper, and I wrote, about Jimmy and Sally and their parents went up to Bass Lake last week. And I learned to never write in the paper that they were going to go next week, because the editor said burglars read the paper. If they know out of town, that's not good.
That's right. Well, how old were you at this point?
Oh, I was about 10 years old.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, I'm 85 now, so for 75 years of my life, I've been in the newspaper business. My mother took a journalism degree at Stanford, and she was always interested in the newspaper business. I'll get on to that a little bit later. The most exciting thing about, we drove a lot back and forth up down the valley because we had grandparents in Bakersfield. And the main difference in those days was the highways. The highways were horrible. They were death traps. If you drove from Madera to Bakersfield, there was no freeway. It was a 4-lane highway, but you stopped at every traffic light in every little town, and it was just horrible. We rode the train if we could do that. That was much easier. And then driving to Mojave in those days, if you want to get a taste of that, drive from Keene, which is the little place where the fire station is, in restaurants in Kern County, the Keene Cafe, and drive that road back up to Tehachapi, Woodford-Tehachapi Road. That was the highway between Bakersfield and Mojave, and there's other little sections of that are left.
Oh my word.
It was a death trap. There were so many accidents out here in those days that when I got a little bit older and Mom and I were working for the Bakersfield Californian, traffic accidents were a news item because a lot of them were really big, involving trucks. And I remember 1 6-month period, we had 5 individual fatal accidents on that big curve coming out of Mojave towards Bakersfield.
Oh my.
Back before seat belts and everything like that. Anyway, we were correspondents for the Californian, which at that time covered Mojave. The only time I cover something in Mojave, I tell them over there at the paper, is when something blows up, a plane crashes, or gets caught with too many animals in their backyard. Anyway, Mom wrote the very first story about California City. She started hearing rumors, and there were rumors that people were buying property out of Cal City. And I graduated from Antelope Valley High School in 1953 because that was the high school for the area. And my first job out of high school, I worked 5 days, 1 week, at a ranch called the Goforth Ranch, which, if you go into Cal City, where the first traffic light is, you'll see the chamber office on the left, and there's a big tin building over there. That was where I worked. I worked 4 days moving pipe, and the 5th day I made the mistake of telling the boss I was not coming back, so they put me to chopping cotton. But the big advantage of that experience was that was the best incentive anybody could ever get for finding good jobs for the rest of your life.
You really understood how hard that was.
Yeah, if you shop, and I worked for the post office for about a year in Mojave. And then the county set up a communication center, the equivalent of what we call a 911 center now, here in Mojave. And it was at the fire station, which used to be where the Wiener Schnitzel restaurant is in Mojave now, the north end of town. So I worked there as a public safety communications dispatcher, dispatching highway patrol, fire department, sheriff's deputies, animal control, which we called dog catcher in that time, much to his regret. And then I worked for the post office for a while. I worked for the post office for a year, I guess, before I went to work for the sheriff's office. And that was interesting because I learned 2 things. We didn't have any home delivery in those days, so it was the biggest source of gossip in the world. And I told my mother when she was working for the paper, you need to get to know the guys at the post office because that's where you're going to get your news.
Know what's going on in town.
Yeah. And I also learned how to deal with people in a business situation. And we had just about every person that you could possibly think of. Well, if you wanted your mail, you had to come in there to get it. And in the meantime, you talk to them, you'd find out all these things that were going on, and it was really interesting. Mom wrote about all kinds of things. In fact, she was a historian. We were charter members. My dad was the second president of the current Antelope Historical Society.
Yeah, I was going to ask about your involvement. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, we had a meeting once a month, and we did a lot of field trips, and they were a lot of fun. And anyway, it was just a good way. And then, of course, Mom she got paid by the inch writing for the paper. So she wrote as much as she could, and she wrote a lot of historical stuff. And, I've got to get a hold of my sister and see if we can find all that and get somebody who'd be interested in typing it all out. It'd be an interesting book on the history of Eastern Kern County.
Oh,
I remember,
yes. Yes.
and I put her often to take pictures of these people. Have you ever heard of Ezra Hamilton in Rosamond?
Of course. Of course, I've even done a PowerPoint on Ezra, and I have some of his handwritten notes or copies of.
Yeah, well, Mom interviewed him and wrote a story for the Californian on him. Interesting old.
Word.
It was not too long after that he passed. Anyway, we're going to high school in Lancaster. The buses we had probably should have been, sent to the trash can or something like several years before. And of course, it was Mojave, so we got the last. We were the last ones to ride it while they were still. And we were kind of a rowdy bunch to the point that an off-duty L.A. County Sheriff Sergeant drove our bus for the last 2 years, who was a real nice guy. Law enforcement. Exciting times. We had 2 buses, and it took about an hour to get from Mojave to Lancaster because, well, the old Sierra Highway, it's still a death trap, but it was, if you can imagine, all that traffic on it.
Yes. Yes.
And we had to go out, and one year we went all the way out to Willow Springs, and it was just, and the buses couldn't go faster than 35 miles an hour, and you got to find something to do during all that time. Of course, there was 1 or 2 people that actually studied on the bus. I don't know how they did it.
You weren't one of them.
Well, all three of us, I went to community college, Antelope Valley and San Jose and Monterey Peninsula when I was at Fort Ord. I never got a degree, but we all turned out pretty good. We were honor grad. Susan went to Mojave High. Mike went to Desert High at Edwards. They kept building schools closer and closer, and Susan got to walk across the street to high school.
Okay.
Instead of ride a bus to Edwards or Lancaster. And it was interesting, and I thought that we turned out pretty good. Mike was in the White House and in Sacramento in the governor's office, and considering where we came from, I think we did pretty good. Anyway, I went to work at the sheriff's office, and that was an interesting job. And then I got a draft notice, and I probably could have got out of it because of my going to school part-time. But I thought the Marines were here in Mojave, and I got to know a lot of those guys. So I thought, 2 years is not going to be that bad. It was an experience I'm glad I took. And I spent the whole time at Fort Ord, except for spending the summers at Hunter Liggett, which now is still an Army base. And the old Hearst, that was where the Hearst Hacienda was. Right. That is now a hotel open to the public. And
when was that? What year was that?
I was in the Army from 59 to 61.
Okay.
And I got to get out a couple of months early to go back to school, which I did for at least one semester, so I wouldn't get thrown back in the Army. And then I had to do 6 years of Air Force Reserve. But after Billy and I had moved up to San Jose, and I went to some meetings up there, and then we moved to Mojave, and they just forgot about me. And one day I got my DD-214 in the mail, and that was my military service. But I respect the military, and I think I really learned a lot from that. Anyway, I had met my wife, Billy, when I had a job when I was in high school, in my junior and senior year, at the old Mecca Theater in Mojave, which is still there. And I got 65 cents an hour and all the popcorn I could eat. And I got a raise halfway through it to 75 cents an hour.
Oh my goodness!
I rarely got to see the movies because I was busy working. But television was coming in, and that theater didn't last too much longer, and the building still sits there. It's a nice building. So anyway, when I got back out of the Army, Billy was one of my regular customers because everybody in town came to the movies because there was no TV then. Yeah. And we got to know each other, just, hi, how are you? And then I got to know her. Billy's niece, she had moved to Mojave the same year, 1948. She's a genuine Okie from Muskogee.
Oh, okay.
Merle, as she told him one time at a meeting we had in Bakersfield, was born in Bakersfield. but she was from Muskogee. And she and her sister, Betty, whose husband was in the Air Force, got transferred to Edwards. And back in those days, there was a bunch of Quonset huts. Were you around then?
I came in 1962, so...
They were all torn down by then.
Right.
Anyway.
Moved. I think some of them were moved, because we have one or two, or had one or two in Roseman.
Well, there's one or two in Mojave, too. Yeah. Horrible places to live, and especially in a town like Mojave with winds and dust. And they were located on what we call Business 58 or Barstow Highway, right there just east of the sheriff's office. And the first morning after they spent a night in the Quonset huts, Betty goes down to the office, which was run by the Navy, and said, "You got to do something. You know, there's about a foot of dirt on our beds." And the guy didn't say a word, just turned around and reached in the drawer and handed her a big roll of tape.
That was common in those days.
Anyway, so she had been married to another gentleman for in fact, Ray Given, who I bought my first car from Ray. He worked at the Ford garage here in Mojave. He and Betty both passed just not too long before Billy did, last year.
Last year, okay.
Anyway, but we moved up to San Jose. My brother Mike was working in San Jose. He'd been going to San Jose State. She wanted to get out of town, and I got a job as a dispatcher up there, much bigger operation. And we got to, visit the Bay Area and all that sort of thing, and it was interesting. And
I went to school at San Jose State. That's where I got my bachelor's.
Oh, you did?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Mike got his bachelor's degree. Well, I don't think he took any postgraduate, but he met a lot of people there. Mm-hmm. And, Mike was a piano player. We all were piano players. I was a piano player only until Mom told me I could quit taking lessons because obviously art wasn't in it.
It wasn't your thing.
Susan and Mike made a lot of money on the side as piano players, playing for weddings and funerals, and they both knew how to play an organ and everything like that. And it was interesting. But so anyway, we stayed up there about 5 years and decided we wanted to go back to Mojave, and which we did. And I went back and worked for the sheriff's office as a dispatcher for a while. And let's see. Anyway, I was always active from the time I was about 18 or 19 years old. I was active in the community myself. I started going to Chamber of Commerce meetings. Dad was active in the Lions Club, and later on, I was president of the chamber. I'm still vice president of the chamber, and in fact, I answer the chamber phone, and which is interesting, especially when somebody calls me at 4:00 in the morning and wants to know what time Plain Crazy Saturday starts.
Oh my word!
Don't laugh.
Oh dear.
So anyway, the Marines came to Mojave they first came to Mojave in 1935, the year I was born. And they came in, or no, the Marines didn't come in, but the airport was built in 1930 by the county. Kern County had the first county-owned airport system in the United States. And Mojave was airport number 7. So right around 1941, the Navy and the Marine Corps started expanding that airport and took it over, and it was active. Well, it was the Marine Corps Air Station during World War II. And Dad eventually sold his service stations and his boat plant business. And he went to work at the airport, and he managed, as a civilian, the fuel operation out there all during the war. And I'm on the airport board, which is, kind of an extension of that.
Right.
And my sister, Susan, served on the airport board also. And on the school board, and then she went to work for the school district and retired from the school district. And now she's married and living in Tehachapi, where she is the former mayor and is now on the city council.
Yeah, your whole family has always been so active.
Yeah, it is. Dad served on the school board in Mojave, and he served on the first school board, which was called the Desert High School District, which is the Muroc, I guess it's called the Muroc High School District.
Yes.
They high school in this Edwards, or in this area at Edwards. That's why Mike had to go to school at Edwards. And then they built Boron, and the last one they built was right across the street, and Susan got to go to school over there. And we were, active in the school government, especially Mike and Susan. And it was just a good experience. Oh, when they moved the base at Mojave, they moved it to Yuma. I don't know. Have you ever been to Yuma?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, well, I've never been there, but anyway, in the middle of July, this boss told Dad, he said, you got to go down to Yuma for a week and sort out and see what all the equipment is like and what we need to do and see if you want to move down there. So Dad comes home on Friday evening and Mom says, well, are we moving to Yuma? He says, I'm going to Edwards Monday and see if they got a job.
Good plan.
Well, he said it was 110 at 4 o'clock in the morning. So
I grew up in the Imperial Valley until I was 8, and we would sometimes go over to Yuma. I know about that kind of heat.
Anyway, I got involved in an awful lot of business. In fact, if anybody ever looked at my CV, they'd say, this guy can't keep a job. But it's been interesting that I've had a lot of different jobs. I was the Mojave constable, and I was...
What did you do as a Mojave constable?
In those days, the courts were called justice courts, or judicial district courts, and the constable was the bailiff for the district. So I was the bailiff in the morning. I was always down there, in court. And then I served civil papers on people, occasionally criminal warrants. I transported prisoners to Bakersfield, both for the sheriff's office and then the CHP and the Cal City PD. After they got set up, they would pay me to haul winos in the backseat of my car over to Bakersfield. I could get stories about that, but that would be another whole program. But
I'm sure.
One of the first things I learned was to have a car with plastic rear seats.
Good thinking, yes. Good plan.
My wife, Billy, whenever I transported a woman or a child, I had to have a woman officer. Yeah. So I made her a deputy, and the sheriff's office made her a deputy matron. And so we got paid double for taking somebody to Bakersfield. I got paid mileage, and Billy got a salary for doing it. And she has some interesting experiences also.
Oh,
but
definitely.
In fact, we were carrying a bunch of kids, and I mentioned this at Billy's funeral as an example of she was one of the sweetest people. We were married 61 years, and he was just a very sweet person. But she was the sixth kid of 6 kids growing up in Dust Bowl, Oklahoma, and she did not take any crap off anybody. And we hauled 2 girls and a teenage boy to Bakersfield, the juvenile hall, one day, and we had a cage, between the front and the back.
Yes.
And this boy kept sticking his foot up there and under her seat. And finally, she got to the point, says, if I feel your foot up there one more time, I'm going to come around there, open the door, and shove it right up your... And those kids never said a word the rest of the way.
That worked.
I'll tell you, he scared me. But what I would make, because sometimes we'd take somebody over in the middle of the night, and if I saw a drunk driver or something like that, I'd pull them over, or somebody weeding around, and Billy would stand off to the right, and she knew how to fire my shotgun, and she always covered me, and I figured if anybody did something, that would be their last act of life.
Great story.
And she come back and put it back in the rack and say, okay, how much longer for Mojave?
That's great. Well, you've done a lot with both state and federal agencies or...
Yeah, I did. Of course, Mike played a role in that. I went to work for a state assemblyman named Bill Ketchum, who covered pretty much a large part of the Antelope Valley, including Rosamond, for many years. He was a veteran of World War II, combat veteran, and in the Pacific. One of the nicest people I ever worked for, a farmer from Paso Robles. And he was the assemblyman for a district that included, as Bill used to say, the western part of Kern County, the southern part of Tulare County, the southern part of San Luis Obispo County, and the poorer part of Tulare County. So I worked for him, and then I got the chance to be the constable. So I did that for a couple of 3 years, and then they did away with the constable. So Bill had been elected to Congress in the meantime. So I went to work for him. I was a field representative for him on both times. And going around, I attended, a lot of Kiwanis Club and Lions Club and city council meetings. And I tried to avoid school board meetings. I had to cover those in the newspaper. And I always say this: the people that work the hardest to earn their meager pay in a board are school board members, because they have to deal with parents.
Okay, we are back now from a brief interruption. Bill, you were talking about your work with several government agencies, particularly Bill Ketchum, I believe.
Yeah, and then after I worked for Bill Ketchum, I had an opportunity. The Mojave Desert News was a weekly newspaper in Mojave, and I knew the Smith people, and I wrote some stuff for them and took pictures. And we got to talking one time. We were active in the Lions Club, and I said, if you ever think about selling that paper, I want the first right of refusal. So at a Lions meeting one night, Bill Smith said, you still want to buy the newspaper? And I said, sure. And I had talked about this to Billy, and we always agreed that we would do that. So we did. We bought the newspaper, and this was about 79, and we had it until about 81. That was about 3 years. And the reason that we decided to sell it was Mike had gone to Washington with Ronald Reagan, and there was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to go someplace. So we sold the paper, and we loaded up our car, stored a bunch of stuff with no promise of a job, drove a U-Haul across the United States, Billy driving our car, rented a house, and within about 2 weeks had a job. Now, Mike had a lot to do with this, although I got my job on my own. And I had met Drew Lewis, who was the Secretary of Transportation. Drew went down to Mexico City on business one time, and I was invited to go along because Drew was working with the railroads down there, and Mike knew I was a railroad buff. And I got to know him, and so I went to see him, and I said, hey, how's about a job at the FRA? And he said, sure. So I spent a year as what's called a special assistant, which is a coverall for political employees, Schedule C type employees. And I worked there with the Federal Railroad Administration. It was a very interesting job. And then a friend of mine, and after this, it's all the jobs I've got because I used to. People say, well, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Well, it's both. Yeah. It's both. And there's nothing wrong with either one of them. That's so right. Having lunch with a friend of mine who was worked for another congressman in the San Joaquin Valley when I was working for Bill. And he said, hey, how would you like to go to work for our office? And he said, and the reason, he says, I'm thinking of retiring in about a year. And he said, you come in there and be a legislative assistant, get to know how a congressional office works. And if everything works okay, you can take over. Well, I did. I worked there for a year. He retired. His wife ran our Fresno office. So I worked for him. No, that wasn't for Ketchum. That was for the Congressman Chip Sheehan from Fresno. So anyway, I went to work, and I was his administrative assistant, which is the top job. And we had 3 districts and offices in the San Joaquin Valley. The district ran from about Cache Creek to Fresno. Wow. And it was interesting. And so I'm able to put on my resume that I ran a congressman's office for a couple of years. And you learn stuff all the time.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
and another friend, when I was at FRA, there was another political there. And of course, the Federal Railroad Administrator was a presidential appointment. And he was kind of my rabbi, at the job. And we had lunch one day, and he says, my girlfriend works at OSHA, and they're looking for some politicals over there. Would you like? And I said, why not? So I went over there and I worked at OSHA for 3 years.
Oh my goodness.
I tell people that, and if they're in business, they go, oh God. But anyway, respect what they do. Every rule they enforce has been written in blood, and we're just trying to keep people from doing stupid things.
That's right.
So I ended up being executive assistant to 2 assistant secretaries of labor for OSHA. That's the top person in OSHA.
My goodness.
And that was a pretty responsible business or job. And I also had a job as the special assistant in charge of federal agency programs. OSHA not only regulates the private sector, they regulate the federal sector. And the biggest at OSHA or at the federal agency thing was the FAA and the post office. I'm sure you're shocked at the fact that I had problems with the post office.
Oh my goodness.
Well, they were, the post office, they just started the zip code thing, and they had all these people sitting in chairs tapping in the zip codes, and they welded all the adjustments on the chair. There was just one size chair, and they were losing people right and left with back problems and everything. And the problem with the FAA is they only had one exit out of the control tower, and we were trying to get them to have, if somebody had a problem in a control tower, they could get out of it without having to jump out of windows if the door from the ladder wouldn't work. But that was exciting. And then another day, I was there 3 years, and a friend of mine who ran the savings bonds division of the Treasury Department. And I had met him. He was the husband of Richard Nixon's brother, the one that ran the grocery store, Donald Nixon. Her father was Donald Nixon. So I worked at savings bonds and public relations, and he also, with my congressional experience, they were trying to get some legislation passed. And I managed to get the legislation passed. It got taken out of the bill before it was actually signed, but at least I got it passed. And then at the end of my Washington career in the government, a guy named Bill Clinton got elected instead of George W. Bush.
Right.
Anyway, and by the way, I got to say this, especially to presidents of all kinds. Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush were 2 of the nicest human beings I ever met in my life. Reagan was just a wonderful person. Nancy was kind of a handful, but Mike's job in Reagan's office was primarily keeping track of Nancy. which every time I go over to their house, he had a special White House phone in his house, and that thing would ring about 3 times, and it was always Nancy.
Oh my goodness.
So anyway, so we stayed around Washington for a year or 2. Billy, in the meantime, had gone to work. She was office manager for 2 California congressmen. And she said, I'd like to stay another year or 2 so I can retire. And so she retired after 2 years, and we moved back here. And the fact that she retired from the U.S. Congress, we have the best health care. The federal agency, federal employees health benefit, which is what they just ought to give everybody, because you choose whoever you want, and it's just a wonderful system. So
fortunate.
Anyway, we decided to move back to Mojave, and we made a mistake. Another little lesson I learned is never move any place on the 4th of July.
Oh.
Because we had some problems with our moving van coming across the country, and this guy at U-Haul said, I don't know whether you're aware of this or not, sir, but the worst day of the year to move is on the 4th of July, and because everybody's they take that day, and
on vacation,
Yeah, so we drove cross country and we towed the car this time instead of because we got separated a couple of times before, and it was kind of exciting. And we stopped in Denver where her sister worked. And anyway, we ended up back in Mojave. And let's see. Oh, I went back to work for the newspaper and did that for a while. And that's when I really started getting involved in the community.
And what year was this now?
It was 94.
Okay.
Now I remember back in I think it was 74. I was one of about 5 businessmen in Mojave who sat down, and one of the guys ran a trailer park, which is called the Spaceport Trailer Park. Well, he had a pool hall in there, and we had the first meetings in there on creating the Mojave Air and Spaceport.
The
Mojave, it was originally the Mojave Airport District and the East Airport District, and now it's the Mojave Air and Spaceport. So I've been connected with that. I did not run for the board up until just several years ago because for much of that time I was involved, full time with the newspaper, and it was kind of a conflict of interest. And I write a weekly column for the paper, but I don't usually write anything about the airport. And I enjoy doing that, and I get some pretty good feedback. And occasionally I get some feedback that's not so good, but that's the way it is, and I just don't answer that.
Well, the column that you write every week now, I hear nothing but good things. And although I don't get the paper anymore, once in a while I do get a hold of a copy, and it's always delightful. Bill, you have a knack with the pen and putting things to paper.
Yeah, I was Bill Warford and I were good friends, and you always every Thursday the paper would come out, and I'd be sitting in my office, in our office down on K Street, and I'd say, well, I got 8 empty pages I got to fill between now and Wednesday at noon when I took the paper over to the printer in Bakersfield. And that is a challenge, and we never had a problem with that. So I send my column in, and usually on Tuesday I email it, and then I get an idea. And then so I sent an email to Warford yesterday, and I said, Prince Charles just wrote my column for next week. Well, he did that because he took off on billionaires going into space, and that's a waste of money, and it's not good for the environment and everything. Well, I've got a lot of real good answers for that. So
you've got some information on that. Well, you have certainly, you and your whole family, but you in particular have certainly contributed a lot to not only our country, but especially to our area. Is there anything else that we can talk about that are, because you have so much information in your experiences, and as I said in the little intro that I did to this, which you haven't seen, I believe that the history of the area is in the people and their activities in the area. So is there anything else that we can add to this?
Another time, a friend suggested there was an opening on the California Fair Political Practices Commission around the late 90s.
Oh, my goodness.
The FCC, you know what that is. They're the people that regulate elections and that sort of thing. So I served for Bill Jones was Secretary of State, and he had an appointment. So I served 4 years. It was once a month. I went up to Sacramento and spent all day and then came back. It was a very interesting experience. I learned a lot about that and conflict of interest and that sort of thing. Trying to keep yourself out of trouble. One of the things that, when we did, one of the advantages of being in D.C. is we were a heck of a lot closer to Europe than we were from Mojave. So we visited Europe twice, and we would go over there for 2 weeks. And I'm sure you're familiar with the Duntley family.
Yes, of course.
Okay, well, Ron and Glenda Duntley were both in Germany at the time. And so we would go over and we would spend the middle, the weekend between the 2 weeks at their house so we could visit them, wash our clothes. And we went with them. The second time we went over there was right after the wall came down. And the Berlin Wall. So we got in their car and drove over into Germany. And I'll tell you, it was like driving into the 1930s. And we didn't notice it so much because when we went into East Germany, it was out in a field. It was just open. And we went through what had been a guard post, and somebody had put up a big Winston billboard where the guard post was, where the guys used to be up there with the machine guns. And we visited this little town, and we went from this little town the other way back into, there was a border right down the middle between East and West Germany.
Yes. And
it was going from one century to the next century. The people in the German side were towing rubber-tired wagons with mules. And the cars were these little, I can't remember the name of this little car they got, but it's got a 2-cycle engine. And you never want to follow it because it's like following a washing machine or something like that. It smelled something terrible. However, we had the best and least expensive meal any of us had ever had in our lives in this little town.
In East Germany.
In East Germany, we drove into this town. We were looking for someplace to eat, and there were no signs then. So we pulled up to this little place, and there was a bunch of cars, and we walked in there, and it looked like a restaurant. And there was a whole bunch of German men in there. It was on a Saturday, and you could hardly see because of the cigarette smoke.
Smoke, yes.
Yeah, one of these guys runs into what was the kitchen. This big chubby German woman came out, and we had, oh my God, it was good. And it didn't cost us hardly anything.
Isn't that incredible how you stumble into these things? Yes.
Yeah, it was fun. It was really interesting. And I serve on the board of the airport district for another year. I'm not going to run for re-election. I was involved with the Mojave Community Medical Center. That was one of the best things Mojave ever did. When we moved to Mojave in 1948, we had a little hospital. The building still sits down there at the south end of K Street, and it's kind of a clinic now. And we decided decided to build a little clinic, and we did that. It's on Belshaw Street, right next to the post office. And it's now maintained and operated by the Adventist hospital system that runs that beautiful new hospital in Tehachapi, which that is the most beautiful building inside and out. I went up there, when I had to have some blood tests for my doctor in Lancaster. So if I go to Lancaster, it's 25 miles and you got to drive through all that traffic. Well, it's 20 miles to Tehachapi and there's no traffic. It's about 2 blocks. But it is just a wonderful place. So I was involved in that for many years, and the biggest problem we had was keeping doctors. But we had some permanent staff that kept it going, and it's now well, these people are committed. Adventist is a company that works with small towns all over the country, and they're doing a good job for us. I was involved with the Edwards Community Alliance, which was formed by the county years ago when you know what BRAC is, base realignment and closure?
No.
Well, gee, you're the only person in the Antelope Valley who doesn't know what that means. Well, that's base realignment and closure, BRAC, is a process by which Congress can close military bases because they're not needed. And the problem with BRAC is they formed that because every time they try to get rid of the military wastes money just like anybody else. And you want to close a base that there's nothing going on there. But the congressman from that area, the constituents, oh my God.
He wants to keep it open, yes.
They formed this committee, or they formed this organization, but I don't think they closed any bases since they did that. So we used to meet once a month and promote the military in the Antelope Valley, which we do at Edwards, and we had it at Mojave. And we also formed the Eastern Current Educational Resource Alliance. If you remember, several years ago, there was talk about trying to bring a university to the Antelope Valley.
Yes.
And there's still people that would like to do that. We'd like to get that going sometime, but it's inactive right now. But Of course, one of the differences with education now is you can do a lot of that stuff by home and that sort of thing. Anyway, I got anything else here? I was on the Kern County. We have our own air pollution control district out here in East Kern because our air is much cleaner than it is in Bakersfield. We have the wind, and we don't have, that toilet that comes down the valley.
Right, which is why your family ended up here in the first place.
That's right. And of course, Susan was born with asthma. But anyway, so lost my train of thought there. Anyway, I know. They had a committee when somebody has a problem, gets in trouble with the district. They had a little committee to listen to the people's problems. They were having a pollution control district variance. They could get a variance, and we'd hold variance hearings. I served on that for several years, and but I've always tried to keep involved in what's going on. We have an Eastern Kern Economic Alliance that meets every couple of months, discuss efforts to attract business. The airport works very hard to attract business into the region, and the airport did pretty well all through the COVID thing. A lot of people work from home, and a lot of people learned a lot of things. We held our chamber meetings on Zoom now, and when we go back to where we can hold them in public, we're going to have variants. We're going to have hybrid meetings. And I'll give you an example of why we're going to do that. We had a briefing at our chamber meeting last month from a company who wants to build a facility out by the county dump or sanitary landfill.
There you go.
Yeah. And there's a big gas pipeline that goes through there. So what they're going to do is they're going to collect recyclable vegetable stuff, oils and stuff like that. And then they'll transform it into natural gas and put it in that pipeline. And it'll be a real nice thing. Anyway, the engineer that described how this thing worked talked to us on Zoom from Switzerland.
That is amazing, isn't it? Yes, it's just amazing. Yeah. Zoom has challenges, but it also connects people in real time from great distances, and that's really important.
If we want somebody to speak to us, like the Caltrans, we're in Caltrans District 9, which is headquartered in Bishop. Well, they put on a presentation for us here about 3 or 4 months ago, and they just did it in their office. And I asked one of the guys up there, I said, how was that, not having to drive down there? He said, well, the only problem is I didn't get a sandwich from Stouffer's Donuts.
Oh.
But they attend our monthly meetings from their office up there. We have people in Bakersfield who attend our meetings, and they don't have to. If we want to get somebody to go to a meeting, we just say, well, I don't know whether I can get there. And I said, well, you got a telephone? In fact, I was sitting there watching a screen, where I'm sitting now one day, and I noticed somebody bouncing up and down. I thought, what the hell is that? Well, about that time, it stopped bouncing, and Ted Hodgkinson, the president, says, is our highway patrol lieutenant out there? And that was him, and he was watching it, and his cell phone was on the dashboard.
Oh my goodness.
Our speaker at last month's meeting was from the Alliance or from the hospital in Tehachapi, and he was on his way to Barstow or something, so he just pulled over and made his presentation from his front seat, or he went back to his car for about 20 minutes and gave us an update on what's happening at the hospital. So it just... Technology
is amazing. It's also frustrating for older folk, but it's amazing.
It's amazing that most of the technology we have right now originated in World War II.
Yeah.
If you look at radar and all the different things that happened in space, and one of the things I will write in my column to the Prince is that all this technology is going to help the environment, because you ever talk to any astronauts, but they'll all tell you, what was the most important thing that you learned? He says, looking down at that little blue thing, how we take care of it.
Yeah, and realizing how small and fragile it is, and how it is so important to take care of it. Yes.
And more people we can get up there, and it's going to be cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, like everything else.
Yes.
You know, I've got this little cell phone, which is it's every library in the world. It's great for reporters, and that thing cost me, I don't know, $200 or $300, something like that. I remember a few years ago when this stuff started coming out, and I bought a calculator. It was about the same size as that thing. It was $80. 2 years later, they were making them that looked like a business card, and people were putting their business card on one side, and they were giving them to you.
Right. Bill, this has been absolutely incredible, and we do so much appreciate you sharing your time with us. I hope that this has helped you sort of go back and relive some of your historical memories, because I think that's a good thing for all of us. Is there anything else that we need to add other than?
Well, you know, a lot of people say Mojave's kind of a bum rap. Oh, you don't want to live in Mojave. Well, you know, we moved back here purposely to live in Mojave. We like it. We live in a nice neighborhood. We've got nice neighbors, and the people in the community work very hard. And I'm not going to move any place. And it's nice.
I see people I know when I go to the grocery store and go to the post office. I like that.
Right. And I've been involved. I was on the healthcare. They had a citizens committee at the Antelope Valley Hospital. I was on that for several years, and I've been involved in a lot of stuff like all over the valley. The whole area. My two doctors are in Lancaster, and it's just a nice region. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Oh, well, this has been a real treat for us, Bill. Thank you, and I hope we can keep in touch, definitely.
Same here, and send me a copy of this.
Okay, will do.
If you ever need any information about this area, just call me.
I already have something I'm going to call you about.
Okay. 8 and 5 any day of the week. You don't mind being called on the weekends, just as long as it's not at 4 o'clock in the morning.
I can understand that. Okay, thank you again, Bill.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.